of a national research foundation, and academic autonomy of all higher education institutions, including colleges. Okay, great step. Independent board-led governance of universities. I mean, this is really something hugely desired. And 4-year UG program in all disciplines, right? So there is many more. And of course, there is online education expansion. But online is a whole this thing, and I'm not going to, in any case, even in education, that's a whole different area itself. Now, there's some recommendations of NEP which relate directly to education, right? And I'm leaving out online education. So let me mention these groups of these 3 groups, and then I'll mention how I think they may impact computer science education, right? So the first is broad-based education in all undergraduate programs with strong multidisciplinary foundations to encourage creativity, innovation, etc., right? So that's a very important theme running across NEP. Colleges, which is where 80% of our education takes place, will become academically autonomous. What does it mean? That they will design their own courses, even if programs are designed somewhere else. But they will design their own courses, their own teaching methods, pedagogy, their own assessment. Huge change, this thing. And there is now the teacher education for school teachers has to happen in universities to improve the quality of teachers. There's a mention of PhD students to take courses on education. There's a strong focus on pedagogy and effective teaching. So these groups, these 3 are related. And so I'll mention impact of each of these on computer science education. Okay, what does broad-based education mean? So broad-based education in a 4-year setting will mean a good set of common courses in various disciplines, right? Now, NEP talks about history, culture, critical thinking, all that. No doubt about it. But there is no doubt in my mind, any forward-looking modern program would have a decent amount of computing in this common courses. And what just Venkat mentioned, people are looking for, in all disciplines, people are looking for far more digital technology awareness and use of those technologies in your discipline. So if you're a sociologist, you still will need to learn all this. If you are an automobile guy, you still need to understand that. So I think, while NEP may not have explicitly mentioned it, as universities unfold their common program across other disciplines, and I'm not talking computer science programs, I'm talking about other programs, the common courses will include a good portion of computing. So there's going to be much more computing education to non-computer science and IT majors. Right now in our country, largely computer science education is limited to CS and IT students. And if you're an engineering student, you get to do one programming course, right? By and large. This kind of computing education is different type of courses and teaching that than in CS, right? You're not developing computer science engineers or software engineers. You are basically enabling whatever they are developing into a sociologist, economist, an automobile engineer, this, that, but with strong foundation in computing as well as ability to use that. So it's not going to be just about programming, but computational thinking and certainly programming and software as a problem solving tool. This is different than what we teach in computer science. So the implication is the computing education will have to expand hugely for this. And a new set of courses with different type of teachers will be needed, okay? Because this type of teaching, the last bullet is wrongly placed here, okay? So that's the first thing. The shift, if it all goes as I think it should, there's going to be change in computing education, really a whole lot of computing education being done to non-computer science people. And that education is different than what we teach computer science people, even though most probably we computer scientists will be doing that. But we'll have to therefore get into that aspect. And it's different, let me tell you that. Now, focus on teaching and learning, the third set of things that I mentioned NEP has. So effective teaching leading to good learning is an important thrust in NEP. You can see that, right? So the courses, there will have to be courses, will have to be designed not only on general pedagogy, which will be for all disciplines as to this thing, but when you're talking about teaching computing, whether it is to non-computer science people or to computer science people, we will also need to develop teaching, effective teaching techniques and modules for that. So you need effective teaching technique modules, which is including on course design. Now remember, 80% of the colleges today don't do course design. They get course design and then they teach it. They have to develop this ability, which comes from essentially effective teaching. What is it that, what are your learning outcomes, how do you design, etc., etc. So we'll need effective teaching technique modules for course design, for effective teaching practices, effective assessment, all those things which now 80% of our education system does not need or have, but will need to have. Okay. Then I think we've not really studied too much about modules for teaching specific CS courses. There's some research and all that in teaching basic programming, but there's a lot more that can be done in that, right? And modules for teaching computing at school, which is being done, for example, CSpathshala is doing it. So I think more research in teaching and learning will be needed in computer science as well, as the knowledge is currently very limited. Okay, and the last point, and then I'm done with my teaching research nexus, right? So the earlier conceptual, we basically, our education was focused on concepts, fundamentals, right? And as Venkat just mentioned, now that's not sufficient. The industry wants more industry ready and innovative agents, right? Earlier, again, the body of knowledge was by and large, more stable, and therefore it was, established body of knowledge was sufficient for teaching. That's also not true anymore. The knowledge is changing rapidly. A textbook 5 years old is already considered kind of outdated. So therefore, to me, it means that to have both more skill-based education, while more contemporary, more this thing, you need the teaching research nexus needs to be strengthened and leveraged more effectively. Right? So research has to guide the evolution of courses, research component in courses, so the students are exposed to, and therefore there are innovation agents and so on. And teaching as research itself in teaching and learning, right? Teaching activity itself can be considered a little bit of research if you think of it properly in teaching and learning, okay? Which means that the role of faculty may change if you want to do leverage this teaching research nexus. So these are the 3 points, the 3 things I took out from NEP and how I think it may impact computer science education. Let me just end with last slide. I think Viraj mentioned this book. I've been working on it for the last 2 years. It has, by the way, a very, I believe I really like that chapter on education. Very, I spent a fair amount of time on it. I spent a fair amount of time on education in IIIT Delhi. Very, huge emphasis on education, and it shows up in that. So while it is research universities in India, education is a very important aspect of research university. And there's a good chapter, I believe, in this. Okay, so I'm done, I think, within time.
Yeah, thanks, Pankaj. Thank you very much. And as we mentioned at the top, we'll take all the questions for the panelists.
I need to...
Yeah, you need to surrender the sharing.
Yeah.
hand over to Sonia. Sonia, I believe you had some slides as well.
Yeah, thanks, Viraj.
Okay, Sonia, we can see your slides. We
You
can't
can
hear
see
you
my
yet.
slides,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Now
Okay.
now
So,
we're right.
a very good afternoon to all of you. And it has been interesting to hear from Venkat and from Professor Pankaj. So, coming to the school level, and I would like to obviously thank Viraj and Venkatesh Raman for giving us this opportunity to speak at the panel today. As you can see in the picture, and Viraj has already spoken about, I'm very passionate about working with teachers and in bringing computational thinking to schools. And CSpathshala is an initiative which started in 2016, and we've been working towards bringing computational thinking to schools from grades 1 to 8. And I won't get into details of the curriculum, but this curriculum has been piloted by over 4 lakh students in 1100 schools across 11 states in 4 languages. And the experience that I bring on board today is with my work at CSpathshala for the last 4 years. I would like to read out this section so that everybody in the audience is aware of what the points that I'm going to take forward. So in the NEP 2020, section 4.25 mentions that it is recognized that mathematics and mathematical thinking will be very important for India's future and India's leadership role in the numerous upcoming fields and professions that will involve artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, etc. Thus, mathematics and computational thinking will be given increased emphasis throughout the school years, starting with the foundational stage through a variety of innovative methods, including the regular use of puzzles and games that make mathematical thinking more enjoyable and engaging. Activities involving coding will be introduced in the middle stage. So when we heard about the draft education policy and also when the new education policy came into place, it was a very exciting time for all of us at CSpathshala because we realized all our efforts were going to finally translate into easier acceptance of computational thinking. Because when we started in 2016, there was a lack of awareness of computational thinking. We had to put in so much effort to get acceptance of computational thinking in the schools. One of the most important benefits I see of NEP 2020 is the shift of computational thinking as part of mainstream subjects, starting from the foundational stage. We'll now have multiple routes for implementation of CT with integration with maths and other subjects. Another important key point is inclusion, wherein now the students from rural, semi-urban and government schools who were typically excluded will now have the benefit with the opportunity to learn computing. Another challenge that we have been working with, and everybody who's been associated with CSpathshala will understand this point, the dedicated time for computational thinking in the academic calendar. And another key point, and I think Pankaj also mentioned, and Venkat also mentioned the whole thing about empowering teachers. So provision for teachers training, because this becomes part of the mainstream subject. So these are the benefits that we see. But moving ahead to make NEP 2020 successful, we also have a lot of challenges. One of the most important points that I feel is computational thinking is beyond coding. Okay, it's the systematic approach to problem solving. And it is also our concern that in urban schools, with the whole thing about including coding, it can lead to new subjects like artificial intelligence and machine learning, entirely missing the conceptual basis of computational thinking. So this is urban schools, but when we are looking at the massive majority, introducing coding throws up multiple challenges in rural, semi-urban and government schools that lack infrastructure and resources. What we need in place is a scalable model to provide affordable computing devices. And of course, that's not enough. We also need access to basic amenities like power supply and basic infrastructure. What did we do at CSpathshala? To address these challenges and make computing equitable, CSpathshala has adopted the unplugged approach of teaching computing without computers. And believe me, all of you who've attended CTIS or have been associated with CSpathshala, you would have seen some of the presentations from our government school teachers who have overcome these challenges and have taken computing to these students. What I would also like to proudly share is 2/3 of our schools are rural government schools, which show that computational thinking is for all. We spoke about this, and I feel this is one of the biggest challenges that we have is empowering teachers. From the CSpathshala experience, teachers training is an important component for successful implementation of CT. I would like to also say, teachers are very enthusiastic, but they lack the know-how. So what do we need in place? What we need in place is a scalable model for teacher development. And also what teachers need to understand, it's not just because CT has been included part of NEP, they have to do it. So they need to know the theory, the reasons of what, how, and why are we implementing computational thinking. Another thing is that building the capacities of teachers on how CT can be taught in the classroom needs to be addressed, because just giving them curriculum is not sufficient. Going ahead, I see a very important role of CSpathshala in making the NEP 2020 successful at schools. Is we need to ensure that inclusion of CT does not reduce it only to programming. Also, we bring this expertise and experience of teaching computing without computers. Sorry, there's a mistake there. And another thing is that over the last 4 years, we have worked in various models for empowering teachers. So if you look at, I've not spoken about the programs as yet, but if you look at our intervention with the Andhra Pradesh social welfare schools, where we've been working with 427 schools and across 2 lakh students, we have in place a scalable model for teacher development program. And another important component is the conference that we have, computational thinking in schools conference. We had the 2nd edition this year, and this is an important platform for school teachers to share innovative and interesting examples and showcase best practices. So these were some of the points that I wanted to share in particular to the NEP 2020, and on also on how these are the experiences that we've had in the last 4 years in bringing computational thinking to schools. And maybe after Jam's thing, and then we can go on to some open discussion on how, on the way forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sonia. Thank you. Professor Ramajam, the floor is yours now. Did you have any slides you wanted to share, or would you just be speaking?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I will start sharing. Okay, so thanks, Viraj, for bringing me in here. And so it's great to come last because most of the important things have been said. Right? So I just have to add a few things. I want to talk about a perspective on NEP by asking, what do we really look for, when a nation articulates its educational policy? Now, an articulation of its vision for the future in the near term. In the near term, I mean, because, maybe for a couple of decades, because I would think that's the lifetime of an educational policy. And a roadmap for capacity building for achieving that vision. Now, this is really what the NEP sets out to do. Of course, such vision should not be blocked by current limitations, but yet, without identifying the central failures and core strengths of the system, a policy cannot offer an implementable plan. Now, I was introduced as person involved in education. Yes, I am. I also have one perspective that I want to bring. I was part of the National Curriculum Framework 2005 exercise. So I want to make it clear that what I bring in is a kind of perspective that comes from the NCF and the exercise that went in. Now, I want to say that when I look at NEP, I mean, Mitch was said, it's certainly true that it's forward thinking. It has a broad vision. And it talks about many of the things that we should do. But what I do have a problem with is that it does not take a hard look at current reality and say, what are the things that are missing right now and why? And what are the strengths that we have got and take off from there. Otherwise, it can become an exercise of putting a lot of good things together, but not being able to take off to where we want to be. So what are the areas of core concern relevant to computing education, if you want? Now, I see that perhaps the central, I would say the elephant in the room for me is the fact that there is little reach. 20 years into the 21st century, less than a quarter of the learning population have any exposure at all to computing. And this is, if you take in university education, probably it's of that order. Higher education, if you take school education, it is much, much less. And if you talk about exposure to computational thinking, the percentage I would put it as minuscule. This is the current situation that we are starting from. And the second one is social exclusion. Sonia talked about rural schools, and I think it is not only about rural schools. The participation in computing of rural and socially disadvantaged sections is abysmally low in the country. And this is where we start from. So computing education largely remains, if you want to look at university level, restricted to engineering institutions. In the universities, there are BScs, but again, participation is largely urban, largely from the educated affluent sections, and there is some in the semi-urban small town areas, but their participation then finally, if you look at those who actually come to computing in their careers and professions, the participation is abysmally low. Now, I think for a national policy, you have to take stock of that and ask why is it, what is happening there and there. And of course, the third major problem is teacher capacity. I would say, Pankaj made a very nice explanation of these. I would say whatever exists in teacher education is certain, in higher education is inadequate. In school education, what is the teacher capacity in computing? I would say it's so low that it doesn't make any difference right now in school education. I know compared to, I do much of my work in mathematics education at school level. Compared to the level of teacher capacity in mathematics, the situation that I see in computing is really low. So this, and I call them failures, not just concerns, because, 30 years ago, maybe situation was different. But, in the last 20 years, there has been very little effort on our part as a society to do anything about it. So the system as such has had very little to focus on and when it comes to computing education. So it's been largely the very few in society, maybe AICTE based engineering institutions which have spent any effort in computing education at all. But then what about the strengths that we have to address the failures about? Certainly, we have a legislative framework right now and administrative machinery in place for universalization of education. And for teacher capacity, there is a large teaching community which can be effective if provided strong support by the system. And there are 100 stories in India of where when support is provided, when teacher professional development is taken seriously, teachers actually respond to it and actually come. Now, when it comes to computing, in terms of teacher support, in terms of teacher guides, in terms of any kind of material for teachers at any level, and I would say, whether it's at school level, secondary level, higher education level, In general, there is almost nothing offered by the system. This is where we are starting. But perhaps I think it's also should be seen as strength that if we could provide that, I think the teaching community will take it up and be able to do. So I'm saying that, and then this is what Sonia read out, and I have highlighted something here to make a point where you say that, mathematics and computational thinking will be given increased emphasis. And I'm very delighted that it's mathematics and computational thinking are linked together, because I think that's the correct way to do it in school. But I don't know. On the other hand, the phrase which immediately precedes that talks about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, and then says this. And then it says activities involving coding will be introduced in middle stage. Now, a lot of this is problematic as far as I'm concerned. I think it's certainly welcome that this is accorded importance, but the coupling with AI, machine learning, and so on is problematic, because this is just invitation to start uh, AI courses in school. We know that many have been announced recently, and there will be data science courses offered at secondary level, and we'll have degrees of this kind. And this is just quick fix way of saying we are addressing the issue, and that's likely to happen if we do not understand why you need these things. The advocacy of coding without context can again be problematic. Sonia talked about this as a problem mainly to talk about infrastructural issues and urban-rural divide. I'm not sure, coding even where, in elite schools with infrastructure available, it's still not a good idea. Whether it's a good idea. Point is, I mean, if you look at item 4.23, which I did not quote, actually it talks about skills. But talking of skills, it's got a long list ranging from scientific temper to sanitation and hygiene. And somewhere along the way, it includes digital literacy, coding, and computational thinking. I mean, I'm deeply bothered by lists of this kind because, to me, it doesn't make sense at all. All these are skills anyway. And, so is it, are we thinking through what we are asking for and how we want to do it? Well, I think there is a way to go. But so lastly, the NEP offers a tremendous challenge and an opportunity. It offers a challenge and an opportunity to identify the right place in the school curriculum for what I would call data sense and algorithmic thinking. In mathematics, we talk a lot about number sense. And I think there is something like that regarding data science, that, data sense that people articulate. And I think we need to, but we also have to say what is the right place for it. It's not just that we have found, somebody is happy with it, but it's not yet clear what's the right place, and we need to find it. And we need to develop computational content in school, guided by research on children's psychology of learning and development, rather than disciplinary considerations or having national goals of leadership in certain areas. And we have to inculcate adaptability and autonomy in the computing science student in higher education. Venkat was talking about agility, and Pankaj was again talking about many of these issues. I think these are very important. But the point is that to be able to be good at many things, right? To be multidisciplinary in nature, to be able to flexibly adopt different modes of learning, you need very strong and broad-based foundations. And I think our curriculum today is largely a spindly shaped tower, where one is built on top of another. To build strong foundations which are broad, more round and closer to the ground is a great challenge. And I think, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. So right now, I would say, there are many good things said, but we need to look at our real problem and very realistically address and prioritize the issues that we need to look at. And I think, sharpen our goals as well as how we are going to go about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jam, and also thank you to all the panelists at this point. So we have a very small trickle of questions coming in. So I'm going to, so we're getting more questions now, but let me start with Ravindra's question. So he's addressed this to Sonia. I think it also relates very closely to Jam, your point that you just mentioned about teacher capacity. So the question, Sonia, for you is, did you notice that those teachers had a background in mathematics were more accepting of computational thinking? And if the answer is yes, and maybe this is where it connects to Jam's point, follow-up question would be, what should the policy and intervention be? That was the case. I hope the question was clear, Sonia.
Yeah, thanks. It was clear because I saw it too. So yes, so did you notice that those CSIT teachers in school who had a background in mathematics, yes, their acceptance was more easy. And to just share with you what ended up happening was, in the initial years of implementation, a lot of these teachers aligned computational thinking topics with maths on their own, right? So we had people taking up chapters on patterns, tessellations, and aligning it in the classroom along with the maths teachers. So this was something that, because the policy has just come in, but this was an attempt that these teachers were doing on their own. And at the policy level, I think I would like Jam also to add his points.
Yeah. May I? Okay. I think I would like to refer to some recent work in Tamil Nadu. I mean, I've been part of a curricular reform exercise in Tamil Nadu, where the state government 2 years ago took up an initiative to redo textbooks. And one of the things that was done was for classes, at the primary and the upper primary level, to bring in some elements. It's called the information processing track, but it's really a whole lot of the kind of CSpathshala curriculum that Sonia was talking about. At least the problem solving, algorithms, and these understanding data, these components. And that's integrated with mathematics. So it is done as part of the mathematics stream, finding some space and doing that. And these are now state board textbooks, which are now in place. And well, I would say that's a policy level intervention to say that not coding, but a certain part of the computational thinking can be integrated into mathematics, taking the space of what was called data handling, and which was predominantly driven towards computing mean, median, mode, etc., and just mapping, rather envisioning data to this. And already there was a certain amount of combinatorial thinking in mathematics, but to highlight it and turn it into computational thinking. So it's possible, but I think this is just as a one shot, a small exercise that you can mention, but having a large reach. After all, state board textbooks reach 30,000 schools, right? So I think policy has to take the coupling of place for computational thinking in the mathematics curriculum fairly seriously. That's what I would say.
Thanks. There's a couple of questions, Pankaj, for you. This is in relation to the points you were making about CS for non-majors. So first question is from Prajesh, which is what needs to be done by CS departments and perhaps other departments to design effective courses for these students from other disciplines, and what role can computing education researchers play in these efforts?
And your voice keeps going up and down. Which question is this in the chat box?
So Prajesh has asked this question, Prajesh Prasad. It's a little bit up in the chat box. A few more have come. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah. It just every now and then it goes off. Yeah,
yes,
please.
Yes. So he's asking about your point about computing for non-majors, and his question is, what role can computing education researchers play in helping to develop such courses? I mean, computing education researchers and CS departments play in actually developing such courses.
Oh, okay. So, see, finally, I think the fact that we have strong foundations in computer science, we are in the best position to develop these courses, even if they require us to learn a little bit more, right? and then transfer it perhaps as far as the. So for example, I'll say, there is a lot of development now happening. We like C, C++, Java and all that. But really speaking, almost all disciplines outside of computing, the way the world is moving, the technology is moving, are really rallying around a whole ecosystem around Python that is developing, right? Everyone's sort of using it in all domains. Now, certainly we are in good position to design such courses, even though for our own computer science students, we may still want to teach them data structures in a certain manner. But hey, look, their life is far simplified in that. So it is not related to our research capability. No, that's something we do what we do. It is related to the capability that we have very strong foundations. We are generally exposed to multiple languages. We understand paradigms, etc. So we are in the best position to design it. But we must get out of our thinking of teaching computer science students, the data structures, the algorithms, and the discrete math that we get after, and see really what is needed by these other non-computer science majors. Okay, but I think it'll come to us.
Sure. So, and I think related to that is Venkatesh Kamat's question, where he suggested, so what would actually go into that course? I mean, would it be something like data science? And I just want to connect that to there was a recent CSCM article where again they proposed this sort of data-centric introductory programming with the idea that something like that would actually be appealing to students from many disciplines, and it might, and that they conceptualized a framework where it would end off with a branching point. So if you wanted to pursue a degree in computing, then you would go one way, and if you were interested in other domains, then that would be a logical breakpoint. So Venkatesh Kamath is saying, do you see data science as an important part in that introductory programming course, or think it might be a very different conception, or would this conception have to emerge after ideas have been tried?
Okay, so I agree. This computing that will spread across is not going to be about programming in the way that us computer scientists like to think of it. It is going to be exclusively and mostly about using software as a tool to solve problems. And to be able to do that, you will need to know some programming, and we'll need to build that. So I think it will be, data science is a good way to look at it, except that data science also has elements of statistics and mathematics. So if we leave that portion out to, let's say, statisticians and mathematicians, by the way, they will also need to develop it properly. The way math guys teach statistics is not the way it ought to be taught. But coming to the computing science courses, certainly, we can think of courses around the use of different technologies or tools and packages and systems that are available, which have also the capability to programming capability. So you can solve your problems, perhaps largely using data science techniques. So yes, data science techniques, which should include some amount of analysis, easy data science, but also perhaps some amount of machine learning. But you see, many of these are now very rich libraries, frameworks, a very rich set of things are becoming available. We have to weave in and design proper courses where we can give at some concept level that they can, and enough so they can use, and concept so they understand what they're doing, and yet not get into the nitty-gritty. And that's a bit of a challenge, but I think we are in the best position to actually take on that challenge. We don't do it for computer science students because we go deep into the bits and the bytes and the pointers and all that, right?
Right. There's a very interesting question from Venkatesh Chopella, and he's asked it in the context of, is this mentioned in NEP? But I'm going to just slightly rephrase your question, Venkatesh, if you don't mind. So he's asking about connecting computing to general science and larger challenges in the 21st century, issues of identity, resources, climate change.
Again, your voice is...
Sorry.
Viraj, I
better?
think
Yes.
that's a question to you as one of the persons. I think you should answer it really.
Well, as I said, so let me first. I hope the question is clear. I hope my voice is clear. If I'm going to answer it anyway, my voice has to be clear. So his question is, these issues around identity, resources, climate change, employment, and so on. Is computing education's sole purpose to produce raw material for the IT industry, or is it, trying to sensitize a wider population? So Venkatesh, I will say a few things about it, but then I'd leave it to the panelists also to add their thoughts. So I think clearly, we would like, since computing is such an integral part of life in the 21st century, we have to involve students at a very, very early age in schools around issues of computing. So although the paragraph that Jam read out, has sort of become a mishmash of what were separate paragraphs and different ideas in the draft policy, I think it has elements of some of these things that, there are issues around each of these which need to be discussed at the school level. And of course, each of these issues has a computing flavor to it. But I think the point that Jam made is that, at least in the way it's articulated in the final policy, there is every concern that it's going to be misinterpreted. But yes, I mean, each of these are, of course, important. I leave it to any of the panelists to add further thoughts if they would like. Otherwise, I'd like to, go ahead.
Okay, no, I'd just like to add that in general, the NEP is, I mean, this is part of what I was talking about, right? I mean, I was talking about the failures in the current system in terms of, one I meant was exclusion. I mean, in general, I would have liked the policy to take a position on the big problems of the 21st century, like, like he says, identity, climate, sustainable living, and preparation for that. And I think it's true that if we articulate a vision based on saying that these are the important problems that we need to address, and for autonomy in citizenship, I mean, that's after all the role of education. What is the role of computing in that? I'm not saying that NEP should articulate that, but I would say that today we should use NEP as an opportunity to articulate such a vision. I think my thing to Venkatesh Chabala is that, probably this is the time to articulate such a vision. We don't have enough public debate on these matters at all. I think we need to do that. That's what I would say.
Thanks. There are a couple of questions that are closely related. Kavya and Janaki have both asked questions related to teacher training. So all the panelists did mention teacher training as an important part. Of course, the policy also emphasizes this. So the question is, what will that training look like in terms of pedagogy, curriculum? And Janaki is specifically asking about how that would integrate into the 4-year B.Ed.
So I'll mention in a very limited context. So I've been doing some workshops and all that on effective teaching, but at the higher education level, right? So I'm sure at the school it is very different. I know very little about it. But there is, for example, an IEEE transactions on education. They discuss things like peer learning, active teaching, how do you take teaching and sort of convert it to a little bit of a research, etc., etc. So there are well-established techniques. There's huge literature and research body by the way, in education, pedagogy, effective teaching at the college level itself, right? So when I started doing it, I realized, and I think IIIT Delhi Library now is one of the better stocked. We have at least a dozen or more books on that topic. So there is a well-defined thing. In fact, all universities, global universities, even the top ones like MIT, Caltech, which has the best experts, have something called the Teaching Excellence Center, Teaching Learning Center, or some such thing. All of them, by the way, all. Okay? I've not done this thing, but my sense is all of them, where they effectively have these kinds of workshops, modules, etc., for domain specialists, computer scientists, psychologists, physicists, to learn how, while you are expert in your domain, how can you use, what can you do so your expertise translates to good learning. So how does teaching lead to good learning is not so obvious. There is a lot of science behind it, and there are some good methods. It's not all that deep, but it needs to be learned and practiced. I'm sure at school level it's something different. So by the way, I did a workshop maybe 2 years or 2 months ago. It had too many registrants, so we had to reduce it. So I may do another one in January. It's a 5-session or a 4-session workshop, just entitled Effective Teaching.
Yeah, maybe I can add something.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
At school level, of course, education research is a vast field, and there is a lot of work on it, in India as well. And there is an entire administrative setup with NCRT and SCRTs and district level. There are diets and these for teacher training. But from whatever I have seen, I'm quite active in mathematics education related areas, and there isn't very much at school level in terms of pedagogy and curriculum issues and teacher training or any kind of teacher professional development exercise. Largely, and we have seen, Pankaj just mentioned these teaching learning centers of many universities. And the tremendous role they have played.
But not in India. And in India, by the way, we don't do it at the college level also.
Absolutely. That's what I mean. And the thing is, the pandemic has shown, right, the teaching learning centers in many, at least the American universities that I know, or even some Western universities, have played some tremendous role during the pandemic, helping teachers and students connect in various ways, not just merely, training them on online platforms, but actually engaging with the problems that come, right? Now, unless you have something in place like that, you cannot react to a situation like this. I heard some remarks earlier today about how the pandemic brought this thing. It's true. We should salute our teachers for it, but we should also recognize that we left them in the cold. The kind of systemic support we provided to teachers during this pandemic was pathetic as a society, right? Suddenly, we made huge demands of our educational community to completely transition into something providing very little support, right? That's the truth, right? And so in school education, despite an elaborate administrative structure being in place, as I said, with diets existing, and that's at every district, and SCRTs, whatever we have done is very poor. So I would say that on this, we have a really long way to go. Whatever we are doing is so small in scale for a country of this size. I think our vision has to be much larger. And Jonaki has mentioned it in the context of 4-year integrated B.Ed courses. Well, she's herself, she's an math education expert, and she knows already how the place of something like mathematics pedagogy in B.Ed is, right? Even in now, what about CT? Computational thinking is non-existent. The very thinking is not there. So I think we are very far from talking about teacher, integration into existing teacher preparation programs or standalone programs and integrating them with the administrative setup that education ministries and departments have. Oh, I think we are very far. I think we need to take a serious call on these things and come up with plans. I think that's what I.
So if I may add, this was a very nice thing. He said it very nicely. So I was chairing one of the subgroups in this STIP, Science Technology Policy. At least we were able to say that, look, we need this teaching excellence, teaching, centers that will understand, do some research in our local context. And we said, right now, since we may not be able to do at university level, let's at least try to get universities in the city together and do a virtual center with, one person from each. And so at least I got it in there. I don't know whether it will happen. So maybe 10, 15, 20 centers in 10, 15, 20 cities may evolve, where focus is really effective teaching learning process, right? And the second thing along these lines, slightly different, but along these lines, we invest so much in higher, it's somewhat different. We invest so much in higher education, but we don't have any higher education research center worth its salt. While, even a small country with 30, 40 universities like Australia has at least 2 or 3 that I know of. I mean, it has altogether 40 or 41 universities, right? So, I mean, that's the other thing. Look, higher education itself is a subject of research. We need to invest, we invest in doing it, but we must also invest in researching it. No, sorry, a bit of digression.
Loud and clear. Pankaj, loud and clear. Yes, I think. Yeah.
Sonia, I would love to hear your thoughts on this discussion.
Yeah, so I agree with what Jam has to say, because there are no processes in place. Like Jam is talking about maths, which is like a mainstream subject, right? And based on our experience at CSpathshala, because we had introduced CSpathshala to computer teachers, right? And to some extent to maths teachers. So there is actually no teacher development program. And another challenge when we are talking about coding being introduced part of NEP, right? What will happen? It won't happen to maybe the rural or the government schools. It may not be applicable there, but largely to the urban schools who will start getting into into coding. There is no teacher development program, and they are not part of any formal teacher development programs as part of the system, because computers is also not a mainstream subject, right? So when we have so many challenges at part of mainstream subject, I wonder how will we be able to. And another thing that Janaki mentioned, and this was a discussion that we had like over 2 years ago, when we were talking about the difference in, in-service teacher training versus pre-service, right? So we were also discussing on how if computational thinking could be integrated at part of the B.Ed course. So some efforts CSpathshala had done, but we didn't get anywhere then. But I'm hoping that with this inclusion in NEP, maybe computational thinking will also find a space in the B.Ed course. Because if you look at a lot of discussions, I was reading up a couple of papers, a couple of publications that everybody shared. I was just thinking that it's very easy to ask, how do you integrate computational thinking across science? Or how do you know, like yesterday I was talking to one of our school principals, and they have this question like, okay, this is coming into the policy, how do we go ahead, right? It can't be answered that easily. You can't say, oh, you pick up computational thinking principles. And another challenge that she spoke about was teachers don't have autonomy to pick up curriculum and integrate it the way they want, right? It has to be in black and white, especially when it comes to mainstream subjects. So I feel one of the efforts that we can all work toward is coming up with some sort of content for teacher development programs. And we need to put these efforts to formalize it, right? Not CSpathshala is like a pilot, like a laboratory to test these practices, but we need to scale and we need to document it and take it further.
Right. Thanks for that point. I actually have a follow-up question for you, but I think it also, I would also direct it to Jam and Pankaj, if you have any thoughts on this as well. So Sonia, you and Jam mentioned about, the risk of CT sort of getting reduced to programming, especially in the way it has been said in the policy and so on. I have a concern that, maybe CT will be reduced to memorization, some ratifying, never, I mean, maybe memorizing programs, but more generally memorizing. I mean, even if it stays away from the descent to programming, maybe it'll just become, ye tarika seekha hai, now repeat it on the exam. So my question is really, I think, as and when we do get this teacher training piece up, um, that as Jam was suggesting might take some time, but how do we head off this general descent towards memorization for CT also? I mean, I'm asking this question first to you, Sonia, because you have interacted with teachers directly, and I want to understand from your experience with them. Do you think that this is a risk of it happening with a subject like this?
Yeah, there is a risk of it happening. I agree with you. So that is why when in my slide, that is what I was talking about, that it is easy to talk about the what and why, right? But how do you take it to the classroom? So even if you, because Sudoku is like one of the most popular activities that CSpathshala has, right? Now, if you look at it, it's not Sudoku is not there to teach children just how to solve Sudoku, right? There is a larger purpose there, wherein we want them to learn the systematic approach to problem solving. But if it is going to become like a rat race in class, right? Oh, this kid solved it in less than 3 minutes, or children start using different hacks to do stuff. We've lost the whole purpose of having these kind of, and this is another point that is part of NEP, right? Where we talk about including the regular use of puzzles and games that make mathematical thinking more enjoyable and engaging, right? This was a point that struck my mind, and that is why it was part of my presentation also. Even though we say inclusion of puzzles or we say inclusion of games, okay, even a simple thing like tic-tac-toe, which is something that we have all been playing with, right? The whole idea of including a puzzle or a game like tic-tac-toe is to help students develop a winning strategy, learn from it, right? But the whole challenge is, and I'm sure Jam also has this concern, that how do you take these practices, how do you build it into the pedagogy when we do teacher development program, right? These should not be just left as, see, for the students it doesn't matter, right? But for the teacher to understand the larger purpose of having these kind of activities as part of modules in bringing computational thinking to schools is important.
Thanks. Jam, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, Sonia was just saying about tic-tac-toe, and the point is about children to discover the winning strategy. And then I would like to say there, but how do you stop teachers from teaching the winning strategy? That's the challenge for your CSpathshala classroom, right?
Correct.
And that happens. The thing is, the class is extremely happy with playing the game and for children to discover whatever. But the moment one person comes to visit, the teacher prepares the children by teaching them the winning strategy so that they can show off the winning strategy to somebody to look. That's because we are used to teaching for performance, right? Teaching for the test. I mean, this is integrated. Now, and once again, I will say, I do not expect your computational thinking activities to be any exception to the rote memory problem. Because if the rote memorization problem is endemic to, I mean, something like mathematics, right? Where you would think that memory should not play much of a role because it's a matter of reasoning, but it does, right? Even math, you memorize the problems and answers. So if you can do that for that, why not for anything? So I would think that cannot be fought by, and it's very easy to play the puzzles and, play the games and enjoy the puzzles and then say, now let's do the serious stuff and do the rest of this. And this is something that we've seen for a very long time. On assessment, I heard a lot of talk and also about moving away from memorization and testing conceptual thinking. But let's be clear about it. If you're talking about a crore teachers in the country, it's not that they don't know that memorization is a problem. It's not that systems don't know that you should test conceptual thinking. But we lack, I mean, there are some tremendous social issues involved in this, but also one of assessment models not being there. The only assessment model given to the teacher is the end of chapter exercises. And as long as it's only end of chapter exercises of which, it's like the drill, right? When there is a whistle, you put up your hand. So if that is a mode of assessing education, of course, it's going to be, why should computer science be any exception to any of these things? So that's a more fundamental problem that we're talking about. And we need some serious change in the system for that. And that's from, primary school to PhD all along. I mean, at university level, at all levels, we have this problem of, you know, assessment following a memory-based, information-based model, and all teaching and classroom processes geared towards that. And then students, of course, are in that mental mode. That's a big change that we have.
Pankaj, did you have any thoughts on this particular one? Otherwise, Venkatesh Raman has a question that is directed towards you.
Okay, let's move on to that. Yeah.
One, all right. So Venkatesh is asking about, Venkatesh Raman is asking about, implementability of this document. I mean, of course, we have a history of creating nice policy documents that then don't really get implemented the way they were written. So I guess he's asking, the question is, what is the chance, you think, in your view, that we see even some of these lovely ideas that you've articulated that you're excited about, how confident are you that we'll actually do the right thing this time?
Oh, you mean the NEP? Now, this is anybody's guess. None of us
Yes.
is from the have any expertise in government. Government is from the government act. But let me tell you, as I said, I have pretty much in my book, in each chapter, I've gotten something for NEP. I was very sort of impressed with what is there. At the same time, actually, my belief, I somehow don't believe that it will get implemented because it talks about too much autonomy. I mean, it talks about the kind of thing, freedom which IIIT Delhi has or IIIT Hyderabad might have for all universities. It talks about, so it is talking about a very big cultural shift of essentially giving all powers to run and administer and all that to the universities. That's doesn't seem to be in our style of functioning, but let's hope for the best, right? But if it does, then it will be great.
Yeah, yeah. I just also want to share, in sort of follow-up discussions that I had with certain members of the committee, because there have been, of course, a lot of venues where I was invited as part of, my involvement there, but a lot of the other members were there. And this question came up all the time, and I think the one positive point I would like to echo from that one of the members had made was that the consultation around this policy, constantly getting inputs from various political parties. I mean, eventually the implementability, depends on those factors to a great extent. And I think one of the points that they had said was, at least it seems to be, that there is reasonably strong support on this policy across the political spectrum. Of course, not everybody, but there seems to be a fair amount. So at least from that perspective, there might be some hope, and that sort of is not just happenstance or just a well-written document. I think it's quite clear that there was a lot of discussions behind the document itself to make sure that these policies would be acceptable. But I agree with you that it is, of course, a very, very radical departure. Of course, a needed departure, but let's see how it goes. Okay, we're getting close, but Venkatesh Chupella has a complex question. So Venkatesh, why don't I just unmute you? Why don't you unmute yourself if you can and ask the question, especially since I'm struggling with audio. Can you unmute yourself, Venkatesh? Yeah, go ahead.
I just did. Am I audible? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my question is sort of, I think a much more modest approach can be taken, which is also sort of more fun, I think. I think if we can connect mathematics and computation and computational thinking with what students really love to do, which is games, sports, music, art, literature, reading, and so on. And of course, there are well established and a lot of fun connections. Would that be sort of a much more, I think, a fulfilling and fun sort of way of introducing some of these concepts? I'm sure CSpathshala has been doing several of those, but sort of weigh that against this cruelty of coding, which both my daughters hated it. They were taught C++ in their 9th grade, and I can't tell you the kind of torture that I'm sure they would have gone through. But I mean, there's something really cruel about putting kids to that level of coding. And now we're talking, of course, about primary school children and early 6th grade and so on. So I think connecting this with arts and other subjects has a much larger positive sort of impact, because people start appreciate. I think what is more important is not to make them learn to code, but to appreciate certain computational ideas. Because we don't know at the 6th grade level whether the student will become, an engineer or a doctor or an accountant or just something else, or a poet. It's just too early. We seem to be putting them on this track. Hey, you become a coder. And the same thing, by the way, also holds for advanced mathematics, which is very close to engineering. And we are forgetting the majority of people who hate these subjects. I'm sorry, I'm sounding too radical, but a lot of this is in fact the case. It is sort of supported by data as well.
So would anyone like to respond?
Okay, I'll shut up now. Yeah.
I mean, I would like to say, in the sense of, I think, again, thinking of more from math, I think almost anybody who has tried to talk about making mathematics education enjoyable talks about relationship with art and sports and games, and especially games. I mean, I have done a lot of use of games in the mathematics classroom. But one thing is that remember that all this operates in a culture, right? So if you do all that and then translate them to 5-mark questions and 10-mark questions, your daughters would hate it anyway, right? I mean, and our system is extremely good at converting anything to a 10-mark question, so, or a 5-mark question, as the case may be, right? So I think that's more the problem. I mean, the problem is, in my opinion, most of these things suffer at the altar of assessment. And it's not that, I mean, if you know, today, the primary education scene, we have seen a change in the last 20 years that I've seen. There is a lot more emphasis given to this kind of thing. By the time you come to middle school, there is less of that. By the time you come to secondary school, already the shadow of the board exam looms large, and higher secondary children are not supposed to have any fun anyway in their lives, right? So, and so on. So this is how our entire system is geared. So my suspicion is that many of these, and what you say is eminently sensible. I think arts students always have something to show as portfolio and say, I created this, and they're very, very proud of having all that. Whereas you don't see math students having anything to show at all, or in fact, now I remember an earlier era where computer science students would be very proud of the software they have written, whatever. I think it's all becoming very small. So mainly because of I think the pressure of examinations is, I think, so strong in our system. I think creative efforts of the kind that you're talking about tend to suffer enormously. But that should not be, alibi for not doing these things at all. Yeah. That's all.
Okay, so I had said that it would be good if all of us could end with some closing thoughts, and maybe one sort of thing you could maybe reflect on as you share your last few thoughts is this community, compute. What do you think members of this community could do? What would you wish members of this community could do to address some of these challenges? I mean, do you think there are useful activities that would shift the needle on some of these massive challenges? What should this community and maybe ACM India more broadly be looking at in response to this policy?
So I would like to just say one. I think
Please.
if assuming we have to assume that NEP will get implemented, right? So under that assumption, I think it's a huge opportunity opening up on the discourse of what is going to be this common broad-based curriculum in the colleges and universities, which are going to convert from 3 to 4, right? A whole year will get added. It's excellent. But I hope it doesn't go, let's add a little bit more math, a little bit more chemistry, a little bit more English. I have nothing against them, but I'm saying contemporary thinking where there must be some good computing as a problem solving tool, not computing as an end in itself as computer science. There is an opportunity to get in there, and I think computer science faculty will have to rise to think beyond computer science, but thinking of computing as a tool, problem solving tool, which supports all disciplines today, and weave in that. I saw, somebody's comment, yes, Venkatesh was saying, I think that, am I propagating English as, all of us need to know English? But yes, so like we have communication, etc. in our engineering courses, and oftentimes they are taught by English faculty. Right? So it's something like that. We want computing to spread. I think there's an opportunity to get in there to make sure the design is not very old. And for that, we'll also have to actually go and do those teaching, or at least teachers training and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thanks, Pankaj. Thank you. Sonia, Jam, in any order, however you would like to go for your closing remarks.
I would like to also add to Pankaj saying that there's an opportunity, especially as I said, going from 3-year to 4-year. What will it mean in the universities? I mean, I think the engineering colleges and the current AIC, CTE based institutions may already have a response, but computer science going from 3 to 4, what will it mean at the universities? I think a lot of work needs to be done, and I think this community will have a lot to contribute in that. And when it comes to school, I think for teacher support at the school level, there is absolutely nothing in place right now. And I think this community could take the lead in at least resource generation and resource support.
Sonia, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to add to what Jam said, because at the school level, we really have no resources, right? So if we could, create resources and provide some sort of support also, in kind of document some of the best practices, like we have CTIS now, like, so build on that
So
platform.
just for the, sorry, Sonia, could I just, for the benefit of the audience here who is not familiar with CTIS, could you just say 1 or 2 words about it, and also how you see the two communities? Is there any room for overlap, interaction, commonality?
Yeah. Okay. So CTIS is the conference for computational thinking in schools that we started in 2019. And this is one of the only conferences that we have for school teachers, especially the computer teachers, to come and share their experiences of interesting implementations and some of the best practices that they've had. And we've seen this grow. Like, when we started in the first year, we had like 56 abstracts, right? Another thing that I would like to share with you, at the school level, teachers don't even understand the word abstract. Forget this, kind of skill to articulate and write up an abstract. So this year was, Jam and Venkatesh Raman did a lot of work on creating samples, kind of providing that kind of support to teachers. And we had 300 plus abstracts. What we also need is some sort of mentoring support, right, for teachers to be able to document some of these practices, because we don't want that everybody is trying to do kind of reinvent the same wheel. Rather than that, if we can kind of consolidate and mentor them in maybe what bringing up the level is not maybe the right word, but helping them articulate, and another thing where I see that we need a lot of support is in assessment. Because if you see schools who have been implementing computational thinking for the last 3 years, and like Jam rightly mentioned, okay, so they will look at the worksheets which are given as part of content and try to make, because it is part of the school system to conduct a unit test and grade students, right? So that boils down to exactly the first question that we had was, teachers have this question of how do I assess, right? So these are some of the questions that if we as a community can kind of brainstorm, think about how we can work towards supporting teacher communities, it will be a very big help.
Okay. So with that, please join me in thanking all the panelists for their inputs. We were supposed to have a breakout session after this, but I think all the panelists have said quite a bit and probably quite exhausted. I certainly am. If anyone would like to carry on the conversation, there's another breakout that's scheduled on online teaching and learning that Madhavan has kindly lead, and Neeldhara and Chitra. The link has been posted to this in the chat channel. So we'll end this discussion on education policy, its implications. Thank you once again to the panelists. I apologize for the issues with the audio. But I hope it was useful. Thanks very much. Handing back to the
and thanks Viraj for conducting it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Viraj sir, for
Thank you.
Thank you, Viraj sir, for chairing the session, and thank you to all the panelists also. And we have posted the links on the chat box for both the breakout rooms, and the participants can join as per their wish. And it's already 4:30, so you can join immediately. And if anyone wants to say anything,
you can the session B you can close actually, because I don't think we'll do that. We had quite a big discussion, so we'll just keep session A. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Is this suggestion coming from Viraj sir?
Yes, and seconded by Venkatesh Raman. So,
Okay.
so we have official confirmation. Yeah. Thanks, Venkatesh. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you to all the participants, and see you in the breakout room.
Yes, thank you.